Regular viewers of this channel will no doubt be familiar with the term Authentic Reactionary, but up to now I've provided no definition. This video is my definitive, concise, exhaustive attempt to describe that position. It is on the one hand a literary mask, on the other a philosophical label. It ascribes its user to a long-standing philosophical tradition, one that encapsulates a learned attitude, an aristocratic disposition, an intellectual Catholicism, a humble scholarliness, and an absolute distaste for the vulgar. I did not originate the term. It was born from the mind of the great Colombian philosopher Nicolas Gómez Dávila, whose works I refer to like a second Bible. As was his way, he did not particularly expound upon the label, being rightly wary of systematic philosophy. The authentic reactionary was simply a concise term for his own thinking. And I want to make clear that you will not come away from this video or from his work with a concrete, systematic set of thoughts and theories, as modern thinkers often try to write. Rather, this is a pointillist painting, a patchwork of ideas designed to give the most lucidity and clarity. Once you have woven together the threads, the heart of the philosophy can begin to beat. I adopted the label Authentic Reactionary when it became clear to me that labeling oneself simply a reactionary was no longer really viable. Not only is it commonly misunderstood, but since Dávila's death in the mid-90s, groups of writers terming themselves various shades of reactionary have appeared. Most of them simply do not pass muster. Gómez Dávila was not simply a writer or a thinker. Throughout his life, he read, and truly read, an astounding amount of the Western canon. He delved into even the most obscure classical authors, poring over their works when no one else did. As the world around him succumbed to irreligiosity, industrialism, democracy, and bourgeois tyranny, he saw in print the world that had been lost. Those that call themselves reactionaries now are too intellectually shallow. Sometime this year I will write, in a little more detail, a book titled The Authentic Reactionary, in which I will attempt to explain this philosophy yet further. His works are few in number. They consist mostly of a few thousand tiny aphorisms or glosses, escolios in Spanish, short sentences, almost like poetry, that encapsulate powerful truths about the modern world. In order to truly read his work, one must connect each aphorism concentrically, like joining dots. Having done this now for several years, I believe we're ready to further this project and carry his words into the darkness before us. Entering the immense garden of Los Escolios, a Versailles on paper, is an arduous undertaking, though highly stimulating over time. Tasting its fruits, savouring them for the right time, and extracting the nutritious pulp from them, that is something that is not mere didacticism. But it can be only enlightened pleasure for the intelligent and nuanced reader. In this sense, Scholia to an implicit text is a work of healthy elitism, against the current, and to all modern ears, very politically incorrect, aimed at reactionary minorities, or failing that, awakened minds whose thinking does not gravitate around the state of predetermined ideas. Gómez Dávila's work reveals significant principles and through lines, all pointing in a certain direction. His philosophy is just vague enough to actually take effect, unlike the weighty tomes produced by his progressive contemporaries. And yet, his work leaves astonishingly few gaps. It is a self-contained matrix of wisdom and wit, spanning almost every idea and trend of thought that has emerged over the course of Western history. Coming from Colombia, what he himself considered to be a subaltern country, Gómez Dávila's heart was always firmly placed in the continental European Catholic tradition. As such, there is no nationalist bombast. His work is, in the truest sense, European. And since the Church is at the heart of his ideas, he rightfully expounds that the idea that Catholicism is the distilled formula of Europe, the true lifeblood of the continent. As stated above, the authentic reactionary is first and foremost a Christian position. I do not say Catholic as such, because we find ourselves in a time where the Church has so regrettably abandoned much of its heritage, and now plays Aristotle to the modern world's Phyllis. Gomez d'Avila held the most love for the Gospels, the good news of the resurrection of Christ. That is at the heart of all Christian faiths. By Catholic, I do not mean necessarily strict allegiance to the contemporary church, but rather to the articles of faith that traditional Catholicism is founded upon. The Catholic philosophy to the authentic reactionary is the key which best fits the human lock. Like any respectable creed, it does not presume to solve all problems, but it is the only faith which is aware of them all. The Christian creed demands that we demand perfection of our souls before we enter into God's kingdom. It frankly, and with divine inspiration, faces the fundamental problem of man, that he is at once a beast and a creature made in God's image. When we sin, we are closest to animal. When we obey God's law, we are closest to him. What is most striking to a modern scholar about Gomez d'Avila's work is that it is pure lucidity. There is no pontification, no clumsy attempt to restructure reality, no intellectual swaggering. There is simply a coherence, a truth, and an integrity to every phrase. Though he references widely, there is a core set of thinkers, a group of distinguished teachers that inspired Don Nicolas most. Thucydides, St. Thomas Aquinas, Montaigne, Juan Donoso Cortés, Jacob Burckhardt, all appear just a few inches beneath the surface. Indeed, unlike the radicals of the last few hundred years, Gomez d'Avila explicitly shuns the urge to be original. Originality, he says, is anathema to honesty. Instead, he works from a group of truths about the nature of man, the world, and God that have governed us since our inception. The thinkers he admires are great because they so lucidly expound upon these truths. They are lanterns on a path surrounded by marshland. The first thing to consider is that the authentic reactionary totally rejects modern political phrasing or engagement. This means a rejection of the left-right spectrum, of democratic parliaments, of the supremacy of the vote, of the secular state. Although most people would describe the authentic reactionary as being on the hard right of the political spectrum, this is in fact incorrect. The entire concept of the left-right spectrum is a construct of the French Revolutionary period. Those on the right are not reactionaries, but rather those that stand on the slower side of the revolutionary party. Instead, the authentic reactionary, from his position in the modern world, can divide the maze of ideas up into progressive ones and reactionary ones. That is the only dichotomy we need. Progressive ideas are those which contradict the eternal truths of man and God. Reactionary ideas are those that accord with it. When one looks around at every ideology on offer today, he finds that they all have the same common purpose: man. The emphasis is entirely on the power and destiny of man, with no mention of God or the vicissitudes of fate that govern us. Man is not and cannot be a sovereign of his own destiny. Of course, the authentic reactionary is not a determinist. We do have a free will to act in harmony or discord with each other. But history clearly tells us that fate and miracles supersede will and power by great strides. As for the great struggle between capitalism and communism over the last 100 years, we can only shrug our shoulders for the reason mentioned above. There is a bourgeois heresy or a proletarian heresy. The choice is perhaps meaning to us. Both enslave the masses. The latter would give us a bullet in the head, the former would give us leprosy. A political reading of Gomez d'Avila's work makes one thing clear. Democracy is not simply a distasteful system. It is a whole heretical religion, an anthropotheist paganism. When man is given the power to decide the outcomes of the hierarchy of his society, he has usurped the natural order. We trust in the anointing of monarchs that rule by and for God. Don Nicolas writes, "The divinity that democracy attributes to man is not a figure of rhetoric, a poetic image, an innocent hyperbole, in short, but a strict theological definition." Thus, the Christian faith which once governed Europe has not been abolished and replaced with any kind of atheism, but with a new faith in which man, the so-called individual, is supreme. This corruption is in itself a product of a fellow heresy, the heresy of progress. Progress has been the rallying cry that destroyed civilization. There is no functional progress among humans. We are the same men now as we were in the Old Testament or in the Greek tragedies. The whole concept of progress is to sell man a lie, that as he becomes increasingly and more painfully divorced from his own natural state of being, he has somehow been improved. That by partaking him in the great industrial orgy of modern times, the progressive is uplifting him, when in fact he is robbing him of the vitality of life. Progress is a filthy value, which sacrifices the lives and souls of men for its own ends in the name of a vague idea. The supreme values, the truths of the earthly life, are banished. As Don Nicolas says, life is a value, and to live is to choose life. Consequently, progress invents itself as a theory of values, but rests on two filial ideas: atheism and forward motion. The rhetoric it uses to push and penetrate its victims has changed over time. Nationalism, democracy, suffrage, liberalism, Marxism, freedom, all different lying faces of the false god progress. But remember, we are not revolutionaries, we are rebels. The difference is important, as Don Nicolas makes clear. Revolution is progressivist and seeks the strengthening of the state. Rebellion is reactionary and seeks its disappearance. The revolutionary is a potential government official. The rebel is a reactionary in action. Indeed, progress itself is a series of revolutions. After every revolution, after each thing is abolished, the progressive revolutionary teaches his disciples that the true revolution will be tomorrow's revolution, because a villain betrayed yesterday's revolution. For Gomez d'Avila, the reactionary's task in our age is to resist democracy. And by democracy he means less a political fact than a metaphysical perversion. Indeed, Gomez d'Avila defines democracy as, quite literally, an anthropotheist religion, an insane attempt to rival or even surpass God. The secret of modernity is that man has begun to worship man, and it is this secret which lurks behind every doctrine of inevitable progress. The reactionary's resistance, therefore, is religious in nature. In our time, he said, rebellion is reactionary, or else it is nothing but a hypocritical and facile farce. The most important and difficult rebellion, however, does not necessarily take place in action. To think against is more difficult than to act against. But all that remains to the reactionary today is, he said, an impotent lucidity. Moreover, Gomez d'Avila did not look forward to the establishment of a utopia. What he wanted was to preserve the ancient values of the world. And for this purpose, not force, but art was the more powerful weapon. In the depths of the democratic era as we are, the authentic reactionary notices that there is only one truly supreme value: money and finance. Money is the predication upon which all being exists, lives, and dies in the modern world. Gomez d'Avila himself says, money is the only universal value that the pure democrat abides by, because it symbolizes a useful piece of nature, and because its acquisition is assignable to human effort alone. The cult of work, with which man flatters himself, is the engine of the capitalist economy, and the disdain for hereditary wealth, for the traditional authority of a name, for the gratuitous gifts of intelligence or beauty, expresses the puritanism that condemns with pride what the effort of man does not grant itself. This heartbreaking fact, then, is the reason why all we see before us now is economic fraud and intellectual anarchy. The greed for profit and usufruct has stripped away all the fruits of civilization. The liberty and independence of the God-fearing man, family property, a sense of being or belonging, courtesy, manners, any sense of refinement, any sense of value. The pilots of the progressive heresy proclaim that technological advancement will bring us new freedoms, when in fact all machines have done is enslave us to them. Tools are the gift of God. Machines are the gift of the devil. For the authentic reactionary, the fundamental unit of any given society is not, as progressive ideologies claim, the individual, the atom, but rather the family, the name, the house, the crest. The breakdown of the family in the modern age has been undeniably catastrophic, and as Don Nicolas writes, a social institution such as the family may not be essential to the survival to a need like breathing air. Violating this order, however, may involve the destruction of everything that coexists within it. Thus, while the order may not be essential to the basic survival of the organism, it may be essential to the preservation of all that is properly human. Quite simply, along with the sacredness of private family property, the family is an institution that preserves the liberty of its denizens. And what does the authentic reactionary mean by liberty? Its very definition has been so besmirched by the ideologues of the Enlightenment that even the echo of it stinks. To us, liberty is not some abstract end goal, but a means by which one lives. A man has liberty when his life is ordered, when his family are about him, when his house and means are in balance, when he is in good stead with God and with the law, when his masters are fair and in turn he is a fair master. It is this liberty which draws us steadily through life. What does it matter then that a man can go and cast his pithy vote in with the rest to decide a president, or that his lord is seated on suffrage as opposed to birthright? These are tenets of liberalism, and they have nothing to do with liberty. However, the authentic reactionary is not merely a position of disaffection with the modern world. The most important task of us who carry the torch of Don Nicolas's work is that we abide by his principle, that the reactionary is fundamentally a forward-looking being. We are not nostalgists. We comb through history for the values that build healthy civilizations and give rise to great things, and we act as the custodians and understanders of said values. These values are apparent in several major concepts. The first is hierarchy. Gomez Davila points out that there is hierarchy in all things. Hierarchy, he says, is celestial. Only in hell are all equal. To the authentic reactionary, hierarchy is an implicit truth. When Christ calls us brothers, he does not mean we are equal, because there are older and younger brothers. God is the sovereign of all hierarchy, and in the well-ordered Christian society, there follow the monarch and all that flows from such a divine institution. More so than the plain institution of monarchy, however, the authentic reactionary prizes the aristocrat as his ideal. The aristocratic personality is simply that which strives for personal perfection and admires the immaterial. The aristocrat is not tied to any great house, any title, any finery or pomp. There are aristocrats in rags just as there are plebeians in mansions. And what of the plebeian? In simple terms, he aligns with the aristocrat. The plebeian knows through urge what the authentic aristocrat knows through knowledge and experience. Their interests are generally aligned. In between them, however, is the bourgeois man. Now, like anyone, the bourgeois man plays an integral function in his proper place. History shows us that the bourgeoisie congregate in urban centres where they become structured and civilized. They patronize the arts. They build great and lasting institutions. But when the bourgeois soul breaks free of this framework and begins his quest to dominate a society, so begins something catastrophic. First, he overthrows the aristocracy. He crushes the church and draws the plebeian masses into a lie. He does not stop until only the bourgeois soul remains. And what is the bourgeois soul? A man satisfied with what he is, but not with what he has. With all other hierarchy disestablished, there remains only the rulers and the ruled. We live now in an age where politics consists only of the swing of a truncheon. The middle class is smug, the lower class is rude, and without the upper class, there is nowhere to take shelter. As has already been hinted at, Gomez Davila shares with the Romantics and the anti-revolutionaries, such as Joseph de Maistre and Edmund Burke, a distrust of Enlightenment reason and intellect. His references to reason and intellect are rarely complementary. Indeed, to avoid confusion with these Enlightenment constructions, he prefers to use the term intelligence or understanding to designate man's ability to perceive truth. The greatest truths, however, are often perceived not by means of abstract concepts, but religious rituals. This skepticism amounts, moreover, to an unsystematic method of composition and a preference for aphorisms. No system is capable of embracing the entire universe and its concepts, and we authentic reactionaries must understand this. Not only is the authentic reactionary extremely skeptical of man's ability to understand the world, he is also very cautious with respect to man's ability to do what is right. Goodwill and sincerity are not excuses for mistakes. Instead, they only make our mistakes more serious. Not surprisingly, then, we are strong believers in the reality of sin. Perhaps the authentic reactionary is the most anti-humanist philosophy since Nietzsche. However, we should not merely repeat old criticisms of the Enlightenment worship of an abstract reason, but rather we should turn skepticism into a strength. Look at the way Don Nicolas deals with problems and solutions, two words that recur throughout his work. He turns their customary relationship on its head. For him, problems are good and solutions are bad. His first and most obvious objection to solutions is that all the modern world's solutions simply do not work. They deprive us of things. Indeed, the modern world, he says, is drowning in solutions. This observation, true as it may be, still does not reach the core of Gomez Davila's objections to solutions. It is not only modern man who is incapable of finding solutions to the world's problems, for no man can devise solutions to the world's problems. Problems are not to be solved, they are to be lived out in our lives. For Gomez Davila, man is an animal that has only a divine solution. Skepticism, then, is not a way of finding reasons not to believe in God, but rather of pruning our faith in God. Problems cannot be alleviated, but they can be ennobled. And like all good philosophies, the authentic reactionary is one with a deep consideration of the aesthetic. Everything has, or rather everything should have, an aesthetic. From the table we sit at, to the way we dress, to the way we work, all should meet our aesthetic tastes and standards. Good taste is a precondition of the authentic reactionary. If there is one value missing on the dissident right today, it is a sensuality, and more so a sense of love. But again, love is a word left with a powerful stink in the modern age. The sensuousness of the soul is what drives our aesthetic tastes, and art is the supreme sensual pleasure. It is a cultural legacy of the ancient world. Societies where the Greco-Roman legacy is being wiped out, where it does not exist, know only sentimentalism and sexuality. And indeed, to the authentic reactionary, the sexual grotesqueness of today is a symptom of an unhealthy obsession. The masters have used sex to dumb the minds of the masses, so that they might not notice under what other tyrannies they labour. Sexual promiscuity is the tip society pays in order to appease its slaves. And as for art, in no previous age did the arts and letters enjoy greater popularity than in ours. Arts and letters have invaded the schools, the press, and the almanacs. No other age, however, has produced such ugly objects, nor dreamed such coarse dreams, nor adopted such sordid ideas. It is said that the public is better educated, but one does not notice. Remember, art is superior to force from where we stand. Lastly, a word that appears strikingly often in Don Nicolas's work, frequently in connection with skepticism, is smile. And indeed, on most pages, one is made to laugh by the observations in the aphorisms, as serious as they may be. I do not have time to make a complete study of the connection between skepticism and smiles, but as one scholar wrote, I suspect that Gomez Davila is the first philosopher to develop a metaphysics of the smile. The authentic reactionary is not merely a pontificator upon life, but someone who lives his philosophy down to its barest principles. In Don Nicolas's own immortal words, "To be a reactionary is to know that we only discover what we think we invent. It is to admit that our imagination does not create, but only lays bare smooth bodies. To be reactionary is not to espouse settled cases, nor to plead for predetermined conclusions, but rather to submit our will to the necessity that does not constrain, to surrender our freedom to the exigency that does not compel. It is to find sleeping certainties and truths that guide us to the edge of ancient pools. The reactionary is not a nostalgic dreamer of a cancelled past, but rather a hunter of sacred shades upon an eternal hill.